and welcome to this week's episode of The Wire Wrap. I'm Jahnavi Sen. Earlier this week, headlines across various Indian newspapers would have us believe that India is now the fourth most equal country in the world. Meanwhile, in Bihar, the Election Commission's decision to go ahead with a special intensive revision of electoral rolls, despite criticism from the opposition and chaos on the ground, has raised questions. Meanwhile, on a global scale, July 19 was supposed to be the earlier deadline Trump had set for countries to reach trade deals with the US if they didn't want heightened tariffs. With me to discuss all of this, I have Dr. Himanshu, who teaches economics at Jawaharlal Nehru University, and Pavan Korada, who's a journalist with The Wire. Thank you both for joining me. Now, as I was saying, earlier this week, several Indian newspapers reported that India is now the fourth most equal country in the world, according to the World Bank. Now, anybody who lives in India and has access to looking at how people's lives go on a daily basis would have a hard time believing this. But the articles that said this were based on a Press Information Bureau release, which was in turn based on a World Bank brief. But what the PIB release said doesn't really match with what the World Bank brief has said. Now, economists who have read both, like Subhi Karwa, who wrote for The Wire, have pointed out that India in fact ranks 176 out of 216 countries when it comes to income inequality, and definitely not 4. The PIB has taken the consumption inequality number for India and compared that with income inequality numbers for other countries across the world. And the World Bank itself has not made this ranking where India is 4, though the PIB does suggest that it has. Himanshu, could you explain to our viewers what this means? What are these two numbers that the PIB has decided to bring together and create this ranking out of?
Well, the World Bank has been bringing out these inequality numbers for quite some time now. I mean, these are like, they almost bring out every year. And these are called what the World Bank now has is the Poverty and Inequality Platform, where they use data from various countries, particularly micro-surveys, and then they calculate poverty and inequality based on these numbers. And the last one that came out was on 5th of June. So it's actually more than a month old when it came out. I mean, although the PIB read it late, they took some time to figure out what is there in the report. So this is something which is an annual feature, and it's nothing new in that sense. What has come out as a new thing is the numbers for India have been revised. I mean, these are the numbers that India's numbers were not there because we didn't have a consumption survey before, after 2011-12. The Ministry statistics junked the one which was conducted in 2017-18, and now we have a 2022-23. So this revision of the World Bank actually uses the 22-23 consumption surveys to bring out the inequality which is there in the World Bank data set. And as has been pointed out by almost everybody, including the World Bank, which basically goes on to mention that one should not be comparing consumption inequality and income inequality because they are two completely different things. And there are logical reasons why they are different. I mean, income has various components which are not there in consumption. It's actually a big component of that is the savings, which are not included as part of, which is part of income but not part of the consumption. And as a result, whenever you look at the income inequality for the same population, any country, anywhere, a normal thumb rule that it is going to be at least 7 to 14 percentage point higher than the consumption inequality. For example, any population that you take it, and if you get the consumption inequality as 0.30 or 30% in that sense, in a Gini scale of 1 to 100, then the income inequality could be anywhere between 37 to 44. And that's a rough rule in that sense. For India, we don't have income surveys. I mean, although the ministry is planning to start an income surveys, currently we don't have any income surveys. So consumption survey is what has been used for India, and that has been used from the time the database has been maintained by the World Bank. It's not something which is new. For most of the poorer country, actually, consumption survey is something that has been used by the World Bank and also by the domestic countries, because the focus is more on poverty, and measurement of poverty is more likely to be revealing the true picture if it is based on the consumption survey rather than on the income surveys. On the other hand, the richer countries or the middle income countries and the upper middle income countries, almost all of them have gone into income surveys. So they all have income surveys. So when you do compare these numbers, you get these absurd kind of results that you are getting here. But that's not the story. I mean, the story is actually that the World Bank earlier used to simply take the consumption inequality that the National Sample Survey would conduct the consumption surveys, and whatever the numbers would come out of it. For the first time, the World Bank has actually tampered with the data and actually adjusted the consumption expenditure surveys or the measures that are getting from the consumption expenditure surveys and done it for only India, and which is where the World Bank's credibility is also to be questioned. It's not just the PIB, and PIB has its own story. I mean, and it's surprising because this is an institution which has normally doesn't like any kind of international rankings and always goes after the international rankings. But this is the time that they have been celebrating as if giving a certificate to the World Bank. But what they didn't realize that in the process they also have been trying to run down their own statistical agency. Because if you look at the data that has come out from the National Statistical Office, which is the NSSO's parent body, and the consumption survey of 22-23, the consumption inequality numbers that you get from there, from the data which is available, you will get something like 29.5. That's the Gini that you will get. The World Bank reports something called 25.5. So there is a 4 percentage point difference. So that's something which is there. And that has happened because World Bank has basically changed the way they are reporting inequality for India. And there are 4 different adjustments that they have done. And all of the adjustments have been basically to lead to a situation which is leading to this lower inequality number. If you look at only the 29.5, which is the reported number, actually it's close to 30 around that, then our inequality numbers are as same as Pakistan, 29.6, China is roughly 30 on consumption inequality basis, Nepal is almost the same as us, Bhutan is better than us. So we are not that the equal country in that sense, because consumption inequality is number roughly around the same, they're quite bunched in that sense. What the World Bank did, and I just wanted to explain to you that, so what the World Bank did is that in the consumption survey we have data that is collected for all items of consumption. This time what the World Bank has done is that it has added the consumption of free transfers. Free transfers meaning the public distribution system, when you get the free grain as a part of the PMGKY, that has been added to the household's consumption expenditure. Normally no country does it because these are free transfers and they are not private expenditure, they are actually government expenditure, and therefore one should not be doing this kind of an exercise. It's a controversial issue simply because the moment you allow those, then the governments will have a tendency to, they can inflate the consumption expenditure by increasing the subsidy on these items. So to keep it separate, they have not been included so far. But also a more philosophical and more conceptual issue as to what all do you include. I mean, like right now we have the PMGK, I mean the World Bank has included 3 items. They have included the free grains, the public distribution system, but they have also included free uniforms, free shoes, and those kind of things which are being given to the. Now that's where the question lies. I mean, what all would you keep on? I mean, the governments are giving them free laptops, bicycles, hundreds of things, that the free housing, various things that you can. And if you keep on adding those numbers, then you are actually inflating and increasing the estimate of consumption expenditure of the poorer households, which is not the lived reality in that sense. So that's what one thing that they have done. They have included 3 items. I don't know why the others have not been included. Why did they not include bicycles or laptops or other things, pressure cookers and other things that have given? But it also what it did was that it reduced the expenditure of the richer households, and it did so by simply saying that any expenditure on durables is actually not a expenditure that should be counted. So they've removed all expenditure on durables by simply saying that these don't add to welfare or something like that, and then, which basically, I mean, who spends on durables? It's the richer guys. That has been removed. They also removed the expenditure on wristwatches, jewelry, saying that these are store of value. I mean, what is the logic as to why only jewelry and this is a store of value and the others are not store of value? One doesn't know. I mean, wristwatch has as consumption utility as, say, for example, a textbook or anything else. I mean, so mobile phone or anything else. So then they removed all of that. They removed the hospitalization expenses. They removed rental expenses. So by doing all of this, removing the expenditure of the richer households and adding the expenditure of the poorer households, what they have arrived at is a much lower inequality estimate than what would normally the data will give you. So that's the magic that they have done. Ideally, the PIB or the government as such should have questioned the World Bank, saying that, look, this is what we have been doing for the 75 years. You never had a problem with our calculations. This is what you have been using for 35 years. Nobody else had a question, and this is how all countries are doing it. But by saying that your data on durables, on various items, or on hospitalization, on a rental is not correct and is not adding to welfare, you are actually questioning the statistical agency which pioneered the consumption surveys and the poverty and inequality estimation in that sense. Rather than questioning the World Bank for tampering with the Indian data, they actually have actually gone ahead and celebrated those kind of things. And I think that something is far more worrying. One should be very careful about it. And I am not sure whether the government of India was in touch with the World Bank or not and what kind of communication we had. But the World Bank's own record is not very stellar in that sense. I mean, their own chief economist, Paul Romer, who also got the Nobel Prize, he resigned in protest because the World Bank was basically manipulating data to support national governments. And this was the case with Chile. And they did it, the ease of doing business. And so the moment this kind of a political interference comes in and this kind of a arbitrary assumption, I mean, things go in and which basically suit the national governments, then there are questions which are raised on the national governments, but also on the World Bank as a multilateral institution as to what is it that they're doing and why make an exception for India and why do all of these kind of things without any consultation or without any things. Government obviously has many things to explain. The same consumption data, if it gives calorie consumptions, then you go to the town saying that all the international agencies are trying to malign India's position and you are basically trying to counter all global rankings. But here you are now celebrating the World Bank at the cost of your own national statistical agency. So again, those are very complicated issues that I don't think has come out in the public domain, but should be discussed. It's not just a question of inequality numbers. And as you rightly pointed out, I mean, this is not something which is, we don't need a certificate from the World Bank to say we are the most. I mean, anybody who has been in India or has traveled to India or has looked at the Indian data would very clearly know what is it that we are talking about. And even the word, I mean, credit must be given to the World Bank at least for this, that in this report itself, they have pointed out, they have said that India's inequality is not only very high, but it also has increased. 1.5 to 0.61, it has gone up to using the World Inequality Lab data, and this is there in the report itself. That has been purposely omitted from the PIB release. But if you take that number, which is there in the World Bank report itself, then this conclusion is very much valid, that India is the second most unequal country in the world. Second most unequal country in the world. And unlike many countries where the inequality has gone down, India is a rare exception where inequality has increased massively by more than 20%. I mean, 10 percentage point it has increased. And this has also been confirmed from other sources of income data which we have. I mean, the government doesn't have it, but at least the India Human Development Survey, the IHDS from the NCAR, that's a reputed institution. They also show inequality increasing, and inequality Gini of the consumption, I mean, income in that sense is almost 20 percentage point higher than what the consumption inequality would suggest. And they also show that it has actually increased. So I think there are number of issues which are involved, and this kind of riding piggyback on World Bank's shoulder and trying to score a brownie point is not something which was expected, and if it comes at the cost of your credibility of your own statistical system, then it is all the more worrying if that there is something else which is going on.
You know, Pavan, Himanshu already mentioned, and I wanted you to talk about that also. We've seen over the last 11 years how the union government has been very upset by several global indices. We've seen Smriti Irani call the global hunger index hogwash. We've seen them come out and call indexes that measure democracy biased and trying to demean India across the world. We also had a report that they had hired a think tank to come up with their own democracy index, sort of homegrown in India. And at the same time, we have also seen sort of cover up on all kinds of data. Like he mentioned, one consumption expenditure survey was junked and then another conducted. We've had a census that is now finally been announced after being delayed from 2021. During COVID, we saw disagreements with the WHO data on deaths in India. Do you think what we're seeing right now about the way the PIB has sort of manipulated the World Bank brief, which already, as Himanshu pointed out, has its own problems, is indicative of the larger approach the government has taken to data?
Yeah, most definitely, most definitely. In fact, as somebody who's worked with data enough, I understand that every time any official, government official or any institution for that matter puts out data, there is a particular reason why they do it. They're not doing it to arrive at some sociological truth like researchers would do. Right? They have a particular agenda, and they sort of release the data in that particular framework. That also sort of leaves some room for academics and other intellectuals to sort of criticize the data, but they will make sure that you are only criticizing it within that framework. So for instance, let's say you define, let's take education for instance, right? Some of the most vulnerable areas are the Schedule 5 areas where you have a massive tribal population, and the literacy rates are very, very low. Now, usually the metrics or the data that are released are, number of schools that are built, number of toilets, special toilets for women, or number of schools that have a library, or if that library has a tablet, for instance, right? So this data is released. Of course, all of us will look at this data and say, what you said, you're going to build 500 schools, you only built 200, therefore what happened? So we think that's our job is done. But we need to move out of that framework, this framework that the metrics create, to ask this question. Because there is rampant hunger and alienation generally, we need to ask, what is the quality of education, for instance? Is let's say a child in 5th grade from these tribal schools able to study a poem, let's say, which you learn in 2nd grade or 3rd grade, which is what, for instance, Pratham does with its Asar survey, right? So it is also about not just the data, but also the kind of questions that you ask, and accordingly you get the data. And I don't think most of the government, they put out any data. They put out statistics, when regarding the electoral rolls in Form 17C, when ADR and Jagdish Chokar went to the Supreme Court and asked them to release the raw data of this Form 17C so that they can verify. EC, even after the Supreme Court directed them, said we only will release statistics. Because I think usually it's easier to sort of give your description, the statistical description of the actual raw data. Because if you release the data, then you'll have intellectuals actually digging through it and then pulling out much more. So yeah, this has been a pattern with every government, and as you know very well, this government is a little way ahead when it comes to doing these things. And also in this larger context of, there's only one solution right now to every problem. You change the perspective of how you look at the problem, and the problem ceases to be a problem, right? So there's one solution to it, PR. Yeah.
True. You want to add anything to?
No, I think this is something which has been, but I wouldn't say that only this government has been responsible. All governments have the tendency to present their version of the truth, which is something which is there. But yes, what this government has done, at least in the last 10 to 11 years, has crossed certain barriers, which normally wouldn't have been there. For example, gave an example of the National Statistical Surveys, the NSOs, the consumption survey being junked. This has never happened in history. The government had a disagreement. And I always give the example of the previous NDA government, which is the Vajpayee government. The Vajpayee government had a problem with the data, but it released the data to the public. In fact, it invited researchers by making the data public for the first time. It had a discussion on this, and when it found that the data is problematic, it stood up in the parliament and said that we are not going to use the data. Unlike this government, which basically tried to hide it. Or for example, the CEO of Niti Aayog coming out and berating the National Sample Survey and saying that the sample sizes, when the leak happened as far as the employment survey is concerned, the census data is a good example of it, the WHO data that you mentioned, but now the census has come out with the sample registration system and the civil registration system, and the data is broadly consistent with the WHO data. So this is something, many other, for example, the normal data is, for example, the economic census, so that has not been released. Many other data has been hidden. So when you politicize data, then it doesn't remain the what you call as some kind of it doesn't have the same credibility as presenting the independent truth, so called, but then it becomes like part of a propaganda, and that is harmful for the government itself. It's not something which is harmful only for the general public, because then you start living in a make-believe world, and that is something which is where I think the problem is. I think independence of the statistical system is necessary, whichever way you look at it, and this government's track record is actually, has been very, very bad.
I wanted to go on to talk about what we've been seeing in Bihar over the last several weeks. Despite serious questions being raised by the opposition, petitions being filed in the Supreme Court, and fears around mass disenfranchisement, the Election Commission has decided to go ahead with what it's calling a special intensive revision of the electoral rolls in Bihar. And this is a state that's supposed to see elections later this year, probably around November. This was announced on June 24th, and the government said it will be done. Sorry, the election commission said it will be done with this by July 25th. So that's 1 month, a 1 month period in which it says it's going to verify 7.89 crore voters in Bihar. Now, just to remind viewers, the commission had given a list of 11 documents that people can use while submitting their form. And it doesn't include some of the most commonly held documents, which are Aadhaar cards, ration cards, and NREGA job cards, particularly among those who may not have documents like a passport or a Class 10 matriculation certificate. Instead, it says to prove your place of birth, you have to use these or a birth certificate, or these are the documents that several people may not have. Now, there are several questions that have been raised around this. One is, of course, the timing. A 1 month period and a list that's going to be released in September, where there'll be just 2 months or so left before the elections, and people may not have a chance to try and prove their case and get back onto the electoral roads. That's one of the questions. And also questions around the EC officers being given the power to report people to foreigners' tribunals if they're not able to give the documents that are being asked of them. Now, petitions challenging this are being heard in the Supreme Court today, on Thursday. At the time of recording, it has not yet happened, but perhaps by this evening we'll see what stance the court is taking on this matter. But the EC, meanwhile, seems very keen to prove that everything is happening smoothly and without a glitch. It said that it's distributed these pre-filled forms to about 97% of the population. It said it's got more than half of them back. But it's also sending out some conflicting messaging. Like just this last weekend, there was an ad in the newspaper that said it doesn't matter if you don't have the right documents or photo, just submit the form. But then they said, no, that's because you can give the documents later till the start of September. Meanwhile, from reports on the ground, we've been seeing several reports saying there's confusion, there's chaos, people are worried, they don't know what documents would work, and that also the booth level officers who are collecting these forms across districts are not consistent in what they're asking for and taking as legitimate. Pavan, you've been reporting on this quite consistently, so I wanted to start by asking you, what are the kinds of exclusions we might see based on the documents that the EC is demanding of the people?
Yeah, so see, they've started off by saying that these 11 documents are required. And if you look at the coverage of these documents, Rahul Shastri has looked at some of this data. The most coverage that one of these 11 documents has is matriculation certificate, right? So that is about 45 to 50%. So that will be roughly about some 2.4 crore people again in Bihar. Then you have a passport, again less than 10% of the population has passport. Then caste certificate, again according to the 2022 Bihar caste survey itself, roughly about 21% of the people, not more than that, have actually availed their caste certificate. Then birth certificate, again Rahul Shastri found that according to the National Family and Health Survey third round, there were about less than 3% of the people who actually have a birth certificate. That is different from the state registering that, okay, you were born. The other is to get a certificate. Now, I was looking at the Family and Health Survey, the fifth round in 2021. Even now, about 76 births are registered out of 100 by the state, and only 56 out of 100 actually have a birth certificate. So there are about 20 people out of 100 who are born, are acknowledged by the state, but in reality, they do not have a birth certificate to prove. Right? So this is a situation. Now, there have been a lot of criticism from, again, legal experts as well. P.T. Achari also wrote a piece yesterday talking about how the EC is going over and beyond its powers to not just determine whether somebody is an eligible voter or not, but to determine whether this particular person is also a citizen. And secondly, this power is being very discretionary in the sense that the EROs and the assistant EROs have been given power to give oral orders. In fact, yesterday the EC again tweeted the June 24th order, which is a 20-pager. I think they ChatGPTified it to make it into 4 pillars of the order, where they were saying, and the final pillar is very interesting. I just want to quote this phrase. So it says, based on the speaking orders of the ERO and to the satisfaction of their suspicion, his or her suspicion, the referral would be made to the Foreigners Tribunal. Now, this is something that is extraordinary, not to mention the fact that it does not have any legal cover, at least a veneer of legal cover like the NRC did. So most of the critics have been arguing that this is essentially backdoor NRC. Right? So that is one aspect of it. The second is also the political fallout of this. Right now, there have been reports. Even Tejasvi Yadav also tweeted, I think yesterday, saying that a lot of fake forms are being generated. A lot of forms are being unable to be uploaded onto the website. In fact, the EC itself, like you mentioned, right, it's trying to give us this feeling that everything is smooth to counter what actually is happening on the ground. And I think they're already prepared, because the EC knew, right, that the devil lies in the method. We've been blaming the machine, but I suppose the devil lies in the method. And I don't think none of us have that kind of resources to go about meticulously checking it. So the EC, I think, sort of anticipated these things, and they were trying to give us this impression that everything is going very smoothly. You mentioned about the advertisement that came about. So if you look at the EC, I was looking at the EC's press notes from the 4th of July onward. And almost every day they're putting out a press note saying this is the progress, right? And they said that about 38 lakh forms have been received until the 4th of July, which is a very small number, right? And after that they issued this ad, and then suddenly the numbers went up to almost 1.3 crore in 2 days, which is 65 and 65. Now they're claiming that they've collected about 85 lakh forms. This is all collection, by the way, not uploading it, right? So I'm guessing, I've spoken to Ajay also, who was covering this from Bihar, and also some other people. And my suspicion is that when the BLOs are going there, or the BLAs, the agents of the BLOs are going to these houses, I suppose every time they don't have a document, they're unable to either upload the form or they're not accepting the form. Right? And I think that is the main problem, because this is again my personal feeling that the purpose of this entire exercise is to create a list of what they did in Assam, right? D voters, doubtful voters. So I'm not really concerned as much about people who already have documents, right? Who haven't filled up the form. If at all they do have documents, I'm sure you can do it at any point. The idea is to create a list of people who don't have it. And if people who don't have documents are not giving their forms, then it's going to create a problem, right? So therefore they issued this saying that it is okay, that these are two separate steps. Collection is one thing, verification will happen later. And what the EC tweeted yesterday also is exactly this. So they will collect all of this under the veneer that, we don't want to leave out any eligible voter, not because they don't have documents, but even if they have documents, you haven't qualified or registered your form before the 25th. Right? They can give whatever reason they want, but ultimately it is all going in one direction, that you want to collect these forms and the verification will happen later based on the satisfaction of the ERO, his or her, and the speaking order. They've also written something very strange. They said, apart from these investigation that the ERO would do, they will base whether you qualify or not, the verification aspect, on field reports. Now, we really don't know what this field report is, right? It could be anything, right? So this sort of leaves a lot of room where even Ganesh Kumar was mentioning in that press meet that no eligible voter apparently has to go and get a certificate or a document that they do not have. Apparently, the agent or the state itself would engage somebody to go and get this certificate. Let's say you don't have a birth certificate, we'll go and get it for you from the government hospital. But I'm not really sure if a state which couldn't produce documents for the longest time and it wants to punish its citizens precisely because of its failure, will have the bandwidth or the state capacity to churn out so many birth certificates, verify and churn out. So I'm most likely, ye sab farzi honge. And I'm not sure if this will be extended, this munificence of the state to serve the people, to get them to be eligible, will be extended to certain other communities, those people who might not be the voters of the BJP. And so that I think is a major concern.
Yeah. I think, what has also been interesting, like you said, that the Election Commission is going one step ahead to talk about basically verifying citizenship rather than trying to enroll voters. Because if you look at the form to enroll new voters, it does not require the kind of documentation that they are asking for voters in Bihar now. And again, I think particularly given the timeline, expecting people to produce documents that they just don't have is a confusing move if there's no motivation lying behind it. Himanshu?
I think one of the first requirements for any kind of electoral process is that it is something which has to build trust. And if majority of your political parties, which are the players, stakeholders, and they are raising doubts, then I think there is one simple reason. I mean, it may be methodologically or whatever way you call it, it actually is the reason enough for you to stop the process. I mean, forget about the Supreme Court and others, but if the political parties who are your, and every process in the Election Commission is through that. I mean, whether it is in the polling booth, your political agents, every other places. So I think that's one thing which they should take note of and then postpone it. Secondly, I think I don't understand why would somebody do that just before the elections, and elections are going to be announced in the next 2 months, and creating this kind of a...
And this is not a surprise. We knew when the 5 years were going to end.
Yeah, I mean, so if you really wanted to do it, then do it and give longer period of time. I mean, putting a gun to the head and then they're basically saying that you do it is something which is again throwing the entire political process. Because remember, this is the time when the political parties are preparing for the assembly elections, but everybody's attention has been diverted to tackling this issue. So this actually disturbs the political process. And I think it's a bad move by the Election Commission to disrupt the political process. So there is a political angle to it, which I think, I mean, why? I mean, normally a political party at this point of time would be preparing to find candidates, go for campaign and do all of that. But right now everybody is so scared and they are all on the street trying to make sure that the sanctity of the election process itself is maintained. So I think that's something which again is what the EC should look into it, because that's something, the timing is particularly wrong. And then as far as the documents are concerned, it's actually very, don't know what one should say. In Delhi and other places, the police is basically rounding up Bangladeshi infiltrators, saying that all other documents are invalid except for voter ID card. Because your voter ID card is the only one which is basically says that you are a citizen.
Yeah.
Because not everybody has a passport. You go to Bihar, it is the other way around. Your voter ID card itself is in question. And you need other documents to justify that you are a citizen.
Keep your voter ID card.
Voter ID card. Outside Bihar, they are saying that all other documents are meaningless. Your voter ID card is the proof of. So there is that. I mean, this is, becoming a kind of a very hilarious experiment. I mean, and I think what you pointed out about the data and all other things are important, but also somebody who has been voted for last 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, the Election Commission has accepted it, governments have been formed and all of that has been done based on that. And suddenly some official will come and verify whether you're a citizen or not. I mean, the person who is the BLO or ERO or whoever is there, that person cannot certify whether you are and it opens up a huge amount of avenues for corruption, all sorts of lobbying, all sorts of discrimination, all sorts of exclusion, and they are suddenly becoming the all-powerful persons. I mean, they have to basically certify, and even that is true for all of them. I mean, like, that person is doing a local government official who may not be a permanent government official, by the way. Most of them are contract employees also. That person is sitting on judgment of your citizenship, and that statement will be taken as valid. It's itself a very, it goes against all principles of systems, governance, justice and everything, which has been the practice for so many years. Many other people will be, for example, somebody who is from Madhya Pradesh and at age 18 get married to Bihar.
Yeah.
And this is very common. Obviously after marriage, women move to. How do I produce my birth certificate and all my birth, because my birth documents and everything is in another state.
And then also your parents may be depending on your age.
Yeah. Or for example, forget about it. Like most of the people, Bihar and Jharkhand at one point of time were part of one state. And they might have been in Jharkhand. And then, so would you go and ask the Jharkhand official to do the same kind of a thing? And this exogamy is the trend. This is the normal route. Most women would be disenfranchised because they would not be born in Bihar. Bihar government cannot produce the birth certificate for them, and they cannot produce that certificate because for them they have to go to their natal home, and from the natal home they will have to get all the documents and do all of that. So it's like creating a chaos before the elections. I think it's politically a wrong move to do, and it is something which is not just a question of methodology. even if was done, I mean, methodology was perfectly all right, I would say the timing itself reeks of all sorts of biases and a clear-cut attempt to disrupt the political process. That is something which is more dangerous.
I think I want to move on to the third issue I wanted to discuss for today, which is that we all know how soon after he took office for this term, US President Donald Trump declared very high tariffs on a range of countries across the world, which he termed reciprocal tariffs, though that has been questioned by economists since he did it. And then very soon after, he put in a 90-day pause. Now that pause was supposed to come to an end yesterday, that is the 9th of July. But since only 3 countries have so far come to a trade deal with the US in that time, he has given time till the 1st of August before these tariffs will be put into action. Now, about 2 months ago, he had said that I have trade deals coming with 200 countries. Right now, we have seen 3 with China, Vietnam, and a deal with the UK. Meanwhile, he's now sending letters to countries like Japan and South Korea saying, from the 1st of August, you're going to, it's like a tax notice almost. And with India, he has been giving conflicting statements. There have been negotiations. It's unclear what the current status of them is. He said recently that a deal is forthcoming very soon, but at the same time then he went on to say that, because India is in BRICS and BRICS is anti-America, they're going to have to pay 10% additional tariff just for being a part of BRICS. Himanshu, what do you think the sticking points might be if such a deal is indeed going to go through? Do you think
given the current state of American presidency, I think even the core team of President Trump doesn't know what is happening or what is going to happen. So I think very difficult to make sense of it sitting outside. And we have seen this happening. I mean, we've seen this happening in just 6 months that he has been president. I mean, like his friendship with Musk and then going against him or taking a position, then going against it. And he has been promising various things. I mean, we'll end the Ukraine war and there's no sign of that happening and all sorts of things. So I don't think the public pronouncements in that sense are going to give us any hint. And I don't think even President Trump is aware what he's going to say next. And he said it very clearly that even I don't know what I'm going to say next. So that's very different. So making a guesswork on that sense is very different. But I think the fundamental issue or approach that he has taken in terms of this calculation of reciprocal tariff itself is a flawed concept. It has never been used and nobody has a clear idea as to where did all these calculations coming. But as far as India is concerned, and that is true for all other countries, trade relations between 2 countries are not simply based on these kind of simple calculations. They are based on various things, including historical considerations, the diplomatic relationship that the countries have. But more importantly, and this is fundamental, this is what Trump is doing actually, is trying to ensure protection for its own domestic economy. And this is what every country is going to do. And I think India should actually be doing it. We don't know what is actually happening. And India should try and protect its own domestic market, its domestic interests. And I think the most important part of that would be to protect the roughly 50% of the population which is there in agriculture or in the rural economy, which is where America's interests are. It wants to enter that agricultural market because India is a large agricultural market which has the capacity to absorb something which is there. And I think that is going to be the sticky point, and that is a sticking point in that sense. India should actually fight very hard, but the messages that we are getting is that India may actually provide some concessions on that. And in fact, there was a Niti Aayog paper that was written by a Niti Aayog member providing some justification as to why India should give concessions to with some hue and cry happening. The paper itself was withdrawn, after 2 days. But that gave a sense of idea as to the government may actually be building up justifications for providing concessions to the Americans. That will be dangerous. That will be like kind of a suicide, not just in terms of the economic sovereignty and policy that we have followed so far, where agricultural trade deals have been a sacrosanct one. And India has fought with not just America, with all other countries in protecting those interests. And this will be a complete U-turn if that something likely to happen. So we don't know what is going to happen. But if the Niti Aayog paper is seen as some kind of a preparation of a PIB brief that will come out to justify this, then I can say that that will be suicidal. The second, I think, is again.
Sorry, before you go ahead, can you tell our viewers a little bit about what you think these protections are? That should
See,
be
we do have tariff and non-tariff barriers both for various commodities. I mean, all of them are actually not prohibitive. They are all within the bounds of the WTO, the current, or what you call as the dysfunctional World Trade Organization, which is, so we are within the limit, and we have been using this to protect our, and this every country does. I mean, remember, we are dealing with the advanced countries, particularly America and Europe, where the level of subsidy on agriculture is way beyond what you can imagine. I mean, and it is something where, so they are in a sense trying to force their surplus into developing countries. So we have put in our protections in that sense, and we don't allow that. The moment we release those protections, we allow those protections to, our markets will be flooded. I mean, like two of the crops which are important is, one is soybean and the other is corn, which is majorly, India has to be more careful also for the simple reason that China was one of the biggest importers of these ones from America, both for corn as well as the soybean. But with America-China trade relations becoming difficult, America has to find a market. So there is a desperation from Americans to find a market. And the only country which can actually absorb that much is India. I mean, given the population size and given the ability to, but that will basically mean that our own domestic economy will go for a. Dairy is also something which has been under pressure, and we have resisted it, and one of the reasons why we did not join the ASEAN and the RCEP and all of that was to basically protect our dairy farmers. So we should actually be protecting those ones, which again, we are talking about millions of small and marginal farmers who are living on subsistence, and there is any kind of a slippage, any kind of concession that we give to the Americans is actually going to have long-term repercussions on livelihoods, on our agriculture and various other things in that sense. So I think agriculture remains a very important one, whereas America does impose huge amount of tariff barriers as far as our agricultural exports are concerned. So we are not allowed entry to that. So they are much more interested in opening up the agricultural markets, and we should try and protect that. I think on minerals again is something where America is, they put it on copper on 50%, they want to do it on steel and again on many other things. But those I think are where India should try and protect, but I don't think that's something which is going to be very difficult. It's difficult for America as well and difficult for others. It's a very small market in that sense. We are not the biggest players in that sense. But I think the whole purpose is in terms of, the one should actually look at it is not just as a simple bargaining, the trade agreement, but in a sense how the international trading order itself, which was built over a long period of time, the World Trade Organization where countries came together and formed the world, is slowly, not slowly actually anymore, I mean it is in one stroke basically being dismantled because one person has decided to set the rules of the game. And I think this process that it is being, I mean initially they announced it in March, then they gave 3 months time, 90 days time, now another time has been given to August. It is not something which can happen. I mean, we might see another deadline coming in, right. We might see another deadline coming in, simply because no country is going to
rush into something.
Yeah, I mean, or to kind of accept the demand that is, I mean, just as, I mean, despite President Trump's wishes, Russia has not stopped bombing Ukraine, nor has Ukraine done anything which is to be there. So I think a lot of factors come into the play. And as of now, what we are seeing is some kind of a pressure tactics, some kind of bullying that is happening. And some countries have blinked, some others are holding on. And there is a bluff that is going on. What India should actually be doing at this point of time is to basically hold on to its own domestic interest at any cost. And because Trump's presidency may be over in 4 years, but the damages that will happen to Indian trading arrangement, but more than that trading arrangement, the Indian agriculture will be very, very difficult to recover for the next 20 to 30 years. We have seen that happen earlier with edible oil and pulses, both of which were given free run by the importers, and we became completely dependent on imports for both, I mean, at least for edible oil, almost 2/3 to 3/4 of our total import, I mean, total consumption is basically through imports, whereas we were self-sufficient at just 10 years before that. and in pulses also we are heavily dependent on imports. So I think to ensure food security, ensure food sovereignty, which is again a very important part of this global condition, India should actually be sticking to its own interest and to try and leverage the whatever mechanism that it has built over a period of time to protect those ones and not to succumb to the pressure that is being put in by the Americans to allow India's free access to India. We don't know, as you said very clearly, and no news has come out from the Indian side also as to what is the level of negotiation that is going on. And less said the better about Americans, because I don't know even the American negotiators know what Trump is going to say next day. So.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you said we haven't heard from Indian negotiators on this, and even from the External Affairs Minister and the Prime Minister, what we heard at first did seem a sort of conciliatory approach that Trump and Modi are close, India and the US are close, it's going to be fine, we're going to figure it out, and that has sort of dimmed in that we're not seeing those comments so much coming from Minister Jaishankar or even negotiators. Pavan, what do you think about the way India started responding to this and where we are now?
So I'll be very honest, I haven't been following precisely, but you were right on the mark when you said that earlier the rhetoric was that my friend Doland, one phone call away and things could be done. But suddenly we've seen that since the ceasefire, right? The entire narrative in terms of how the PR team approaches this issue has completely flipped. In fact, recently Modi hasn't been initially not invited to the G7 also. Then we didn't see Jaishankar being very aggressively countering that by saying we'll have our own G7 or whatever. So I think there has been a message going around that PR can only get you so far. Right, that's not a genuine response to diplomacy. Diplomacy takes effort, a lot of discussion, rational discussion, like he's saying. You have to trash these things out. So yeah, I mean, it seems like the government is on a back foot. Yeah, and just to add to what Sir said, I also feel that because there have been some reports now that there is a significant pushback even from the MAGA crowd regarding the new front that has been opened up in the Middle East vis-a-vis Iran and also Yemen for that matter. This rhetoric over trade and other stuff will be bumped up now, right? Because the idea is to sort of shift the focus away.
Domestically in the US, that will gain importance.
Yeah, precisely. And that is why you see Musk in the government for the longest time, and Donald Trump having his own social media platform. All of these, I think, are attempts basically to sort of shift the focus whenever they want. Yeah.
Is there anything you would like to add to?
No, very, very, this is like, it has become a game guessing game, and what you said about the domestic situation, the US also playing a role into it. But I think from Indian point of view, I think it is important to remember that whether it is America or any other country, after all, diplomacy is not about friendship. It is about protecting your own interests, and that way Trump is very clear. He's not going to forgive you, or he's not going to make concessions for you, even if you're his brother. To that extent, he says that trade is the only thing that matters. And I think if that is the underlying, the terrain on which every negotiation is happening, then I think India has to be far more cautious than what it is so far projecting, at least in the media.
Okay, we'll end our discussion here for today. Thank you both so much for joining me, and thank you all for watching.